And again, we want to talk about Marshall Faulk real quick. Marshall Faulk, as far as running backs go, is also the all-time leader in receptions, receiving touchdowns with 36. That covers the NFL statistical leaders, from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. I'm Ernie Jennings, your host, and we're going to go back to looking at the last division left in the NFC, specifically the NFC West. We've covered every other division, the AFC and NFC, and we're down to the last four teams. Looking forward to wrapping this up because it means we are ever closer to the beginning of the regular season, less than 2 weeks away. So excited about that. If you're like me, you might have some drafts coming up, fantasy football drafts. I've got 3, and a couple this starting tomorrow, actually, 1 tomorrow. So looking forward to that. All right, so today we're going to look at the Los Angeles Rams. We'll take a look at the greatest Ram players. We'll look at the 2024 team and finish up with a look at the upcoming season. So the Rams finished the season with a record of 10 wins, 7 losses. At home, they were 5-4. On the road, 5-3, and in the division, 4-2. This is the exact same record that the Seattle Seahawks had, down to every win and loss in division on the road or at home. So it was very close between the two. It ended up the Rams coming out first based on the division, based on the tiebreaker called strength of victory. So it was very close. Got down to that kind of a tiebreaker to decide who was the winner of that division. So being rewarded, they got to play in the wild card game against the Vikings at home. They beat the Vikings 27-9. Wasn't really close. The next week, they had to go to Philadelphia and play the Eagles. They ended up losing that game 28-22, close game, to the eventual Super Bowl winners, the Eagles. So decent season, probably a few too many losses than they really needed to have, but they ended up showing fairly well when it came to the playoffs. So the Rams have been around since 1937. And I mentioned that because some of the records we're going to look at cover the Rams, and they'll say St. Louis Rams. They were in St. Louis from 1995 to 2015. They started off in Cleveland, but then they spent most of their years in Los Angeles, either before or after the time they spent in St. Louis. So that will be reflected in some of these records. If I happen to mention St. Louis, you'll know why I'm saying St. Louis. All right, so when we're looking at the coaches, we'll start with the coaches as we usually do. Sean McVay became the leading coach for the Los Angeles Rams last year. John Robinson had the record with 75 wins when he was coaching from 1983 to 1991. Sean McVay, with his 10 victories, passed him and is now the leader with 80 wins. Really not that many wins for a team that's been around since 1937, but that is the lead. So Sean McVay will be able to continue to extend that record out. All right, let's look at the quarterbacks. Start with the offense here and the quarterbacks. Jim Everett, not a name you would expect to be the all-time leading passer as far as yardage goes, but he is. Jim Everett from 1986 to 1993 had 23,758 yards passing to beat out Mark Bulger and Roman Gabriel, who both had over 22,000. Those are your top 3. The only ones over 20,000, in fact, over really 19,000. Now, Matthew Stafford currently is 6th with 14,700. Interestingly enough, he should easily pass Norm Van Brocklin. He only needs 1,400 yards, a little over 1,400 yards for that. But then next up for him is ranked number 4, Jared Goff. So it's interesting that he'll pass the guy that swapped places with him. Jared Goff is now in Detroit, and Matthew Stafford should pass him this year if he's able to play. His back has been an issue, but if he is, all he needs really is 3,500 yards or so, and he will move into fourth place all time in yardage. So that's where he stands currently. Now, when looking at touchdowns, this team, the Rams, in different categories, there's a different player, it seems like, almost every time. But Roman Gabriel from 1962 to 72 had 154 touchdowns to lead the team. Jim Everett was second with 142. Now, Matthew Stafford is eighth in this category with 95. Now, last year he had 20. If he got 20 again, he would pass Jared Goff, who has 107. Matthew Stafford, if he only had 20, he'd have 115, which would put him ahead of Jared Goff. Now, if he could get about 24, he'd actually pass Norm Van Brocklin and move into fourth. So we'll see how he does there. But as far as that goes, Matthew Stafford's is eighth right now. Now, in interceptions, you won't see Matthew Stafford up there. He's way down the list. He's only got 44. But Bob Waterfield, another name, had 128 interceptions in his career from 1945 to 1952 with the Rams. So he's the leader there as far as interceptions go, over Norm Van Brocklin, who had 127. Those are your top two interception leaders. Final category we're looking at for quarterbacks is sacks. And here's another one, unfortunately, for Roman Gabriel, but he leads it with 263. Mark Bulger had 254. They're the only two even over 200. Matthew Stafford has 117. Now, he was sacked 28 times last season, which is not something you want to see. But with 28 sacks, if he had another 28, put him up about 100, it'd move him all the way to fourth all-time for the Rams. So hopefully he doesn't get there. If you're a Rams fan, you don't want to see that. All right, so that's your quarterbacks. Let's look at the running backs. So Steven Jackson, and there's some good running backs on this team, but Steven Jackson, not the name you would have thought of initially, but from 2004 to 2012 had 10,138 yards rushing to lead the team. Second was Eric Dickerson, Hall of Famer. He had 7,245 yards. And Marshall Faulk was third from 1999. And in five, he had 6,959. Those are your top three by quite a ways, too. Now, when we're looking at the current players, there's really nothing. Kyron Williams is 16th, in his few years that he's been there, got a new contract, so he has an opportunity to move quite a ways up this list. If he could have a good year, 1,000 yards, just 1,000, which is way less than he had. He had 1,299, I believe, this past season. But if he had 1,000, he'd move all the way up into fifth place. So quite a jump he could make as far as that goes. Now, when we're talking about yards and we're talking about running backs, well, we'll get to Marshall Faulk in a bit as well. But as far as Eric Dickerson goes, now he had 7,245 yards with the Rams, but he also played for other three teams. He ended up with a total of 13,259 yards, which is ninth all-time in the NFL. So he had an incredible season. Obviously, over half the yards came with the Rams, and the other half came with three other different teams. But he's the leader as far as all-time players go. Now, when we're talking about touchdowns, this is Marshall Faulk and Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley was with the team only from 2015 to 2019, but he had 58 touchdowns, and Marshall Faulk had 58 touchdowns. So they're top two players. Currently, Williams has 26. He's been actually pretty decent in the rushing touchdown category. I think he had 14 last year. He gets 14 again. He's all the way up to sixth all time with the team. So pretty impressive. All right. Those are your top running backs all time. All right. Let's look at the receivers career-wise. The leader is Isaac Bruce, Hall of Famer, with 14,109 yards. Terry Holt was second with 12,660. Now, Isaac Bruce was 1994 to 2007. Torry Holt, 1999 to 2008. So you had two really supreme high-quality receivers playing basically the same time. Really incredible careers they both had. But Isaac Bruce was a Hall of Famer. And in fact, Isaac Bruce is 13th all-time in receptions. Talk about that right now. We'll get back to the yardage. Now, with the Rams, he had 942 receptions. In his career, he had 1,024. So really, he didn't have that many. He only had 82 away from the Rams. He played for another team. But with 1,024 receptions, he's 13th all-time in the NFL. There's only 15 players currently. There'll be a couple more that are going to break into this category, but only 15 players to have 1,000 or more receptions. Isaac Bruce was 13th at the time. Now, Travis Kelce's 20 behind him right now, and there's a couple other players that are pushing 1,000 this season, so you could see that change as well. But still, he's one of the few that made it to 1,000-plus receptions. Again, Torry Holt was second with 869 receptions. Cooper Kupp was third. Going in through last year was 634, but now he's with Seattle. So we move on from him. Higbee, top tight end all time with the team as far as receptions go with 361, which places him ninth all time. He'll easily move up past the 8th spot, and all he needs is 41 receptions to move all the way to 6th. That's probably as high as he's going to get. But 41's not out of the realm of possibility at all for Tyler Higbee. Now, Nakua is already 24th when it comes to receptions with 184. In his 2 years, he's already 24th. He has a good season, 100 receptions. He'll jump all the way up to 13th. Those are your all-time ones. Marshall Faulk is somebody we want to talk about. Marshall Faulk is 5th with a team with 470 receptions. Very impressive. But when we're talking about running backs all time, Marshall Faulk is 2nd in receptions all time with 767 receptions. Only Larry Centers had more. So he had well over half of his receptions, 470 out of his 767 with the Rams. And again, he played for Indianapolis, St. Louis, but really incredible player. Now, when we're talking about yards, coming back to the yard situation, like I said, it was Bruce and Holt, top 2 players. And then when it comes to yardage, talk about Marshall Faulk again. Marshall Faulk had 4,071 yards receiving, which puts him number 1 all time in yardage. When you combine the yardage he had with Indianapolis as well, he ended up with 6,875 receiving yards, which topped Larry Centers. So really an amazing career that he had, as a running back and as a receiver. Now, Isaac Bruce, like I said, 14,109 yards to lead the team. He ended his career with 15,208 yards from 1994 to 2009. He only played 2 more years after he left the Rams, and for a total of about 1,000 yards. But his yardage total puts him 5th all-time in the NFL as far as receiving goes. And there's nobody going to catch him, at least this year, despite he'll be caught in yardage. In receptions, but not in yards. For his career, at least with the Rams, he averaged 15 yards a catch. That's extremely high. All right, look at the touchdown category here. Now, this is Isaac Bruce again with 84, Torry Holt with 74. Those are your top 2. Now, Marshall Faulk had 27. And again, we want to talk about Marshall Faulk real quick. Marshall Faulk, as far as running backs go, is also the all-time leader in receptions, receiving touchdowns with 36. So, like I said, very incredible career. Now, Cooper Kupp again was 3rd already with 57. He's gone again, like I said, to Seattle. Higbee is way down at 14th with 24 currently. And then Nakua. Now, this is a big difference because, which I didn't mention it before about yardage, but Nakua was already 20th in yardage and, like I said, 26th in the receptions. But when it comes to TDs, he's only 52nd with the team all time. Only has 9 touchdown receptions in 2 years. Now, like I said, Stafford only threw 20 touchdown passes last year anyway, so makes it a little difficult for him. But that's a category where you'd like to see some improvement with Nacua. Now, I don't know if it's going to come this year because they've got Davante Adams on the team now. Davante Adams is already number 10 all time in touchdown receptions with 103. So they could pick up on that. A guy who just makes a career out of touchdown receptions, and it may really hinder Nacua from having those touchdowns this year. All right, those are your offensive players. Let's look at the defense. Now, when it comes to the defense, this is an interesting category, not for the current team, but for all time. Actually, that'll be more when we get to the season level. But Eddie Meadow from 1959 to 1970 had 46 interceptions in his career. Only player over 40. Nolan Cromwell from 77 to 87 had 37. Currently on the team, Darius Williams has 7 and Kobe Durant has 4. So they're no one really to talk about in that category. All right, so let's move on to tackles for loss. Now, tackles for loss is a different story here. Aaron Donald dominates this category for the team. He has 176 tackles for loss in his career from 2014 to 2023. 176. That puts him 4th all time in the NFL as far as tackles for loss. Now, currently on the team, you have Byron Young and Kobe Turner. Young has 20, Turner has 18 career-wise with the team. So, again, this is an area where they really don't have anybody that stands out. All right. One last category is sacks. Now, here, that's interesting. Deacon Jones leads the team with sacks with 159.5. Jack Youngblood had 151.5. And then Aaron Donald's third with 111. Now, the interesting thing about Jones and Youngblood is Deacon Jones played from 1961 to 71, and then right after him came Jack Youngblood from 1971 to 1984. So for a period of 23 years, they had 2 of the best sack artists in the NFL. Now, currently on the team, again, it's Kobe Turner and Byron Young. Turner has 17 for his career, and Young has 15.5 for his career. So neither one is going to challenge any of these records. But these 2 players, Deacon Jones and Jack Youngblood, and even Aaron Donald, and to some degree, we'll talk about him in a minute as far as it goes. But on the sacks unofficial list, which started in 1960, it didn't become official till 1982. But Deacon Jones is 3rd all-time on the unofficial list with 173.5 sacks. He played for 3 teams. Now, obviously, he got all but 14 of his sacks with the Rams. He's 3rd all-time in the NFL. Jack Youngblood is 6th all-time with 151.5. So 2 really incredible sack artists, 2 of the top 10 on the same team. On the official list, they don't make this list because their sacks don't count because they didn't play from 1982 on. So neither one makes the list. I think someday you'll see the unofficial list be part of the official list, but for now it's not. All right. Let's look at the season leaders, and we'll start with the passers, the quarterbacks. Now, this is interesting. Even though Stafford's only about 6th career-wise, he's number 1 as far as most passing yards in a single season. Kurt Warner in 2001 had thrown for 4,830 yards. 20 years later, in 2021, Matthew Stafford comes along and throws for 4,886, beat Kurt Warner's record by 56 yards. Pretty close. Now, he did play 17 games versus Warner's 16, so a little caveat there. But those are your top 2 as far as yards go. Now, Matthew Stafford had nowhere near that type of a season last year. He only had 3,762 yards last year. So a little bit of a different year. We'll see how it goes this year. With that 3,700 yards plus, he finished 13th as quarterback in the NFL in 2024. Joe Burrow was first with 4,918, followed by Jared Goff, who's obviously was with the Rams, who was second with 4,629 yards. So those are your top two. Now, when it comes to touchdowns all time in a single game, single season, I should say, that is Matthew Stafford, but he's tied with Kurt Warner. Both of them had 41. Kurt Warner in 1999 and then Matthew Stafford in 2021. So you can see that Matthew Stafford really had a down year last year. I mean, he only threw 20 touchdowns, and he's thrown as many as 41 in a season. And that's really, though, as far as the Rams go, that's by far the most he's had. In 2023, he had 24, but he only played in 15 games. So he might have hit as high as 30, but nowhere near the 41. I should mention, as far as yards go, Matthew Stafford with that 4,800 yards plus, almost 4,900. It's not his best season ever. In 2011 with Detroit, he had 5,038 yards, which put him 14th all time as most yards in a single season. Only 15 times has somebody passed 5,000 yards, so it's pretty impressive, Matthew Stafford. But this past season, with only 20 touchdowns, he tied for 15th. And again, it was Joe Burrow who had 43. Really great year for Joe Burrow as far as passing game goes. All right. Now, when we're talking about interceptions, this will go back to the past as far as the top player there. And that's Bob Waterfield. Had 24 interceptions in 1949. Now, Vince Ferragamo in 1983 came close with 23 interceptions, and then Kurt Warner in 2001 also came close with 22. But those are your leaders. Now, this past season, get to it here. Matthew Stafford only had 8 interceptions, 20 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. That's okay. You'd really like, for a really good season, 3-to-1 ratio, a decent season, 2-to-1. So he's somewhere in between that as far as touchdowns go. All right. Now, when we're looking at how many times a quarterback's been sacked in a single season, this goes to Dieter Brock. 51 times. The only player over 50. In 1985, he was sacked 51 times to lead the Rams as far as sacks go. Matthew Stafford, his worst season was 30. So, and he had 20, twice he had that, and then, so he's been around that range, 28 to 30 every season. You know, he's really handy about getting rid of the ball, so he avoids some, but he's getting up there in age. He really does not need to be sacked this year as few times as possible. Might see Williams get that ball a lot. All right. When it comes to the running game, well, here you have the all-time best. Eric Dickerson in 1984 rushed for 2,105 yards to set the NFL record all time. Still held up. Adrian Peterson in 2012 came really close, only 8 yards away from tying him. Pretty close. But still, Eric Dickerson from 1984. So this is a record that's been around 40 years and still hasn't been beaten. Now, Saquon Barkley last year had 2005 to lead the NFL. So that's impressive. Made that list. 8 players have had more than 2,000 yards in a single season. Now, Saquon Barkley could have came close to breaking the record, but he didn't play that 17th game. And obviously, Eric Dickerson did it in 16 anyway, so just as well. Now, this past season, you did have, as far as rushing goes, you had Kyron Williams. He finished 12th all time with the Rams with his season last year of 1,299 yards. Pretty impressive. Now, as far as the NFL goes, look at that here in a second. That was a decent season. I could put him, I'm trying to check it out here. Yeah, put him 7th in the NFL last season as far as yards rushing. Not too bad. Now, when it comes to touchdowns, though, that's a different story. When it comes to touchdowns all time, this is still Eric Dickerson, but he's tied with Marshall Faulk. Eric Dickerson in 1983 had 18 touchdowns. rushing. Marshall Faulk in 2000 also had 18. Now, this past season, Kyren Williams, this put him in 7th on the team all time. He had 14, tied him actually for 6th with 14 touchdowns rushing. Pretty decent. Anytime you have double digits, that's really good. That also placed him just behind 4 other players. Saquon Barkley had, Derek Henderson. Let me get this straight. Derrick Henry, I'm rushing myself, Jahmyr Gibbs, and James Cook all had 16 touchdowns rushing. Josh Jacobs had 15, and then Kyren Williams had 14. So 5th in that category. Really impressive for him this season. All right, that's your running backs. Let's look at the receivers. Now, when it comes to receptions in a single season, well, obviously it's Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp in 2021 had 145 receptions. That just smashed the record that had been held by Isaac Bruce since 1995 of 119. Just smashed it. It also put Kupp second all-time in receptions in a single season, just behind Michael Thomas, who had 149 in 2019. So very close to catching Michael Thomas even. Really incredible season for Cooper that year. But 145 receptions. Now, this past season, Nacua was the top receiver with only 79 receptions. So not that great for him. Obviously, he didn't play the entire season. Only played 11 games, so he would have definitely been somewhere around the 100 mark if he had been able to play. So you're looking for a healthy Stafford, or at least a playable Stafford and a healthy Nacua. And we'll see how it goes for this upcoming year. Now, when it comes to yards in a single season, well, again, that's Cooper Kupp. Same year, when he had the 145 receptions, he had 1,947 yards receiving. That's the highest ever. And again, he beat out Isaac Bruce, who in 1995 had 1,781. Those are your top 2. Now, this past season, as far as yards go, Nacua only finished at 39th spot in the yardage. As far as the team goes last year, only had 990. So nobody on the team had 1,000 yards. So it was a little bit of a down year as far as that goes. We're looking for something different this year. As far as that, they really need somebody to stand out between Nacua and Adams. We'll see how that goes. All right. Now, the last category, most touchdowns receiving in a single season, and that is Elroy Hirsch, 1951. So this record's been there for 74 years. 17 touchdowns in a single season. Now, Cooper Kupp, in that great year he had in 2021, had 16 touchdowns. That's the closest anybody's come to this record. And when it comes to touchdowns, well, there's really nobody currently with a team that has that many. Demarcus Robinson finished 42nd as far as touchdowns receiving this past year with only 7. But like I said, Stafford only had 20 touchdown passes anyway, so you're not going to see anybody that high up the list. All right, let's look at the defense on a season level. Night Train Lane in 1952 with the Rams had 14 interceptions. That is number 1 all time in the NFL. Pretty impressive. Still been a record now for 73 years. And it possibly could stay a record. No one's really, latest anybody ever came close was in 1980. So it's been a long time. That was Lester Hayes with 13 with the Oakland Raiders. So, and then not just to mention Night Train Lane, who has the number 1 record, but for the Rams, Woodley Lewis had 12 in 1950. So, which is tied for 5th all time in the NFL. So 2 of the top 10 players were with the Rams as far as interceptions in a season. Now, when it comes to tackles for loss, this is where Aaron Donald stands out. He had 25 tackles for loss in 2018. Now, Robert Quinn jumped in there in 2013 with 23, and then Aaron Donald had 22 in 2015. Now, that 25 that he had in 2018 is good enough to put him 8th all-time in the NFL as far as tackles for loss in a single season. J.J. Watt holds a record with 39, which seems like a big distance from 25, but it's interesting because the second spot is also J.J. Watt, who did it twice with 29. So that 39 tackles for loss in 2012 is such an outlier. It's so far ahead of anybody else, including J.J. Watt himself, that 25 is really an excellent season to have. All right, so when we're looking at sacks, again, here's where this unofficial and official list makes a difference. Deacon Jones on the unofficial list in 1964 and in 1968 had 22 sacks in a season. 67, he had 21 and a half. Those are your top 3 totals. Now, Aaron Donald in 2018 holds the official record with 20 and a half. So the big difference here is that with 20 and a half, Aaron Donald doesn't make the unofficial list if you include these other guys at all. Doesn't make the top 11. While Deacon Jones is tied for 4th all time with his 22. So, and then also has the 9th spot with 21 and a half. So Deacon Jones, the only player on the unofficial list who's on there more than once, and he's on there 3 times. So incredible guy as far as that went. Now, when you are talking about the official list, this is where I'm talking about really the top 10. Aaron Donald then is number 8 all time as far as sacks in a single season. Makes quite a difference when you can include the unofficial list. All right, let's look at the team outlook. This has been very difficult to figure out. Vegas has them at 9.5 wins. When you listen and you read, their offense could be superior, but we're just talking about, you have to really think about the health of Stafford and Nacua, as well as a more difficult defensive schedule, teams that they're playing, and it just makes you wonder how well this team's going to be able to play. Are they going to be good enough to get 10 wins again? It's just tough to see. Their defense is just all right. Their defense was actually not that great last year, in the bottom third of the NFL, so they need improvement there. So it's really it's a difficult thing to decide. So if you're saying Stafford is healthy, and now you have Devontae Adams, which is definitely, I believe, an upgrade over Cooper Kupp, then you could see maybe a pathway to 10 wins. But I'm going to tell you, I don't know. Williams is good, so they can hand it off to him a lot, and he can really push the ball, and they can really grind out games. I honestly, I've said this in the past, but 4 to 6 teams that make the playoffs don't make it the next year. And I really think this is going to be the case for the Rams. I hate to say it because I really actually like Stafford as a player. I've always found him an exciting player to watch play. And I like Devontae Adams as well, but a couple of my favorite players. But I think they're going to end up with about 9 wins. It's going to be a more difficult division, a little bit tougher schedule for them. And just my concern over some of the health issues. So I predict that they're only going to end up with 9 wins. Now, when you're looking at the fantasy outlook for this team, Puka Nacua has been wide receiver 4. He's been going somewhere around the end of the first round, beginning of the second round. So if you like him and you're willing to take that risk, you're going to have to pick him up. If you're first in the draft, you're probably not going to get him at all. But if you're toward the end, you might want to pick him up. If you're somewhere between 10 and 12, you might want to pick him up. Or if you want to take a chance and see if he can roll around to the beginning of the second round, he might, but it's a chancy thing. Kyron Williams now is RB13. He's been going at the beginning of the third round pretty consistently. He's really good. One of the running backs that, is going to catch some passes as well. And just, he's going to get the carries. So definitely a guy you might think about as one of your top running backs. Now, Davante Adams has already been coming out. Well, I should say he's been going in the middle of the 4th round. And from everything I've read, Davante Adams looks as good as he's ever looked. And he's playing with Stafford. And he's got Nakua on the other side. So he should really do well. And if he continues with that touchdown specialty of his, you could really see a 4th round pick for him as a good pickup for him. So those are your top 3 players, probably the only ones you're really interested in as far as the Rams go. So that's my take on the Rams. Next week, or not next week, I should say next time, will be the Seattle Seahawks. So I'm closing in on finishing up every team in the NFL. If you want to hear your team, if it's not one of the next 3 coming up from the NFC West, you can go and listen to a previous podcast, which you can find on YouTube at Just the Stats NFL. Of course, you can find it on any of your podcast outlets as well. If you want to contact me on YouTube, you can just leave a message there at Just the Stats NFL. On YouTube, you find me, Facebook, X, Instagram, all at Just the Stats NFL. And email, you can get me at justthestatsnfl@gmail.com. If you have a question, comment, appreciate that. All right, I appreciate you listening. That is a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats NFL. So until next time, I am out.